That ugly thing is going in the street where it belongs.
That's what the HOA president screamed before she planted her boot on my trash bin and kicked it like a field goal. Every garbage day for 2 months, she did the exact same thing. Trash scattered across my lawn, coffee grounds in the wet grass. My father, who has dementia, flinching at the crash from his window. She called my bin an eyesore. Then she wrote me up for the mess she made. That's the kind of woman she was. The kind who mistakes control for class. What she didn't know was that I'd spent one quiet weekend anchoring that bin to 90 pounds of hidden steel and concrete. 4 cameras were already rolling, so this time I didn't run outside. I sipped my coffee and watched her foot find my surprise. Where are you watching from? Stay, because she earned every second of what came next. Let me back up, because you need to understand who I am before you understand why she lost. My name is Owen Whitaker. I'm 44 and I pour foundations for a living. Footings, retaining walls, precast pads, the kind of concrete that holds a house up long after everybody forgets who poured it. It's quiet work. You measure twice, you set your forms, you wait for it to cure. Patience is the whole job. My hands are usually gray with dust, and I like it that way. People hear concrete guy and picture a slab and a wheelbarrow. The real job is reading the ground before you ever pour. Soil that looks solid can swallow a footing in a wet spring. So, you test it. You measure the frost line, the drainage, the load. You learn to trust documents over feelings because the ground will lie to your eyes every single time. 20 years of that teaches a man to slow down. It teaches him that the loudest person on a job site is almost never the one holding the real plan. I live on Larkspur Court in a place called Sutton Ridge, a planned community in Delaware County, Ohio, just north of Columbus. Brick mailboxes, trimmed lawns, the smell of cut grass, and somebody's gas grill drifting over the fences on a Saturday afternoon. Sprinklers ticking at dawn. From the outside, it looks like the American dream with a homeowners association stapled to the back. I moved here for 2 people, my daughter Hazel, who's 9 and missing both front teeth, and my father, Raymond, who's 78 and slipping away from me one morning at a time. Dementia doesn't take a man all at once. It takes him in small thefts. Last spring he forgot how to knot a tie. This winter he forgot my mother's been gone 6 years, and I had to tell him again and watch him grieve her again in the kitchen at breakfast. Dad needs routine like a plant needs light. Same chair, same window, same soft morning. Loud surprises rattle him for hours. So, I built our days around calm. I thought that was something a neighborhood would respect. Then I met Brenda Vance. Brenda had been president of the Sutton Ridge HOA for 9 years. White Tahoe, always freshly washed. Linen blazer over yoga pants, sunglasses on a gold chain. She walked like the sidewalks paid her rent. Her husband, Curtis, sat on the board too, which meant the Vances were basically the local weather. You didn't argue with it, you just got rained on. The trouble started over nothing. Trash day in Sutton Ridge is Thursday. I'd roll my gray bin to the curb Wednesday night, same spot by the maple, the way every house on the street did. The first Thursday, I found it tipped over. Lid open, trash dragged across the lawn. I figured raccoons. The second Thursday, I was at the window with my coffee when I saw her do it. Brenda walked up the sidewalk, looked right at my house, and shoved my bin over with her foot. Casual, bored almost, like flicking a cigarette. Then a notice showed up in my mailbox. Sutton Ridge HOA violation. Refuse improperly stored, debris visible from roadway. $50 fine for the mess she made. I read it twice in the driveway while the cicadas buzzed in the heat, and I told myself, calmly, that there had to be a misunderstanding. There wasn't. There was just Brenda. But I didn't know that yet. What I knew was the sound my father made when the bin crashed that morning. A small, scared sound, like a boy who'd been caught somewhere he shouldn't be. He'd shuffled to the window in his slippers and stood there gripping the sill, asking me if we were being robbed. I had to walk him back to his chair and put the game show on and sit with him until his breathing slowed. By the time he settled, I'd missed half my morning, and there was still trash to rake out of the juniper bushes. So, no, this wasn't about a trash can. It was never about a trash can. It was about a woman who decided my family was an easy mark, and a father who deserved to drink his coffee in peace in the last good years he had left. I decided, standing there in the sun with a banana peel at my feet, that this was going to stop. It just wasn't going to stop the way she expected. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to feud. I was going to do what I do with everything that pushes against me. I was going to study it, measure it, and find the exact point where it breaks. I'm a patient man. People mistake that for weak. Brenda made that mistake for 9 weeks straight, and I let her, because every week she made it, I learned a little more about exactly how she operated. The third Thursday, I tried the friendly route. I caught her on the sidewalk, coffee still warm in my hand, and I kept my voice easy. "Morning, Brenda. I think there's been a mix-up with my bin." She didn't even slow down. "There's no mix-up, Mr. Whitaker. That receptacle is an eyesore, and it's in violation. Move it back by the garage or it stays in the street." "The whole street puts bins at the curb," I said. "That's where the truck picks up." She smiled the way you smile at a child who can't read. "Other streets maybe. Sutton Ridge has standards. I set those standards." Then she tapped my bin with her shoe, just enough to tip it, and walked off while a banana peel rolled into the grass. So much for friendly. I stood on the sidewalk a minute after she left, watching her white Tahoe roll down Larkspur like a parade float. A neighbor's dog barked twice and gave up. The morning smelled like cut grass and warm asphalt. And I remember thinking how strange it was that a place this pretty could have something this rotten walking around in linen pants. I picked up my trash piece by piece and carried it back to the bin, while the Hendersons pretended not to watch from their driveway. Nobody offered to help. That told me something too. People here were scared of her. Scared enough to look away from a grown man cleaning up garbage that wasn't his fault. That night, I bought a camera, a good one, weatherproof, mounted under the porch eave with a clean view of the curb. If she wanted to play games, I'd at least have a scoreboard. The fourth Thursday, she didn't disappoint. 7 minutes of crisp video. Brenda strolls up, glances at my porch, kicks the bin hard enough to scatter trash across 10 feet of lawn, and keeps walking. Then she stops, pulls out her phone, and photographs the mess she just made, for the next violation notice. That's the part that turned my stomach. She wasn't just being cruel. She was building a paper trail, documenting my filth with one hand while creating it with the other. It was almost professional. What got me, watching that footage back, was how comfortable she was. No hesitation, no looking over her shoulder. She'd done this so many times to so many people that vandalism had become a chore, like checking the mail. That's what unchecked power does to a person. It sands the conscience down until cruelty feels like routine. I've seen it on job sites. The foreman who's never been told no, who starts cutting corners because nobody ever made him pay for one. Brenda had been told yes for 9 years straight. She'd forgotten the word no existed. I was about to remind her, slowly, in a language she couldn't argue with. Documents. The notice came 2 days later. Second offense. $100 now, doubled for being a repeat. And a line at the bottom I'll never forget. Continued noncompliance may result in removal of the receptacle at the homeowner's expense. She was threatening to throw away my trash can and bill me for it. I'll be honest, that one got under my skin for a second. I was standing in the kitchen reading it, and Hazel looked up from her cereal and asked why my jaw was doing the thing. Apparently, I clench it when I'm angry. 9 years old, and she reads me better than most adults. I smoothed it out and told her it was grown-up nonsense and poured her more milk. But inside, a switch flipped. There's a kind of person who tips your trash and laughs. And there's a kind who tips your trash, documents the mess, and builds a fine off it like she's running a business. Brenda was the second kind. The second kind doesn't stop when you ask nicely. The second kind only stops when the numbers stop working for her. Here's a thing worth knowing, and you can look this up yourself. In most places, the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street isn't even your yard. It's public right-of-way, owned by the city or county. Homeowners mow it, but they don't own it. The takeaway, an HOA can make rules about your property, but it has no power over land the city controls. I didn't know that yet. I just had a feeling, the way you feel a wall isn't plumb before you ever hold up the level. So I did the boring thing. I started a folder, every notice scanned and dated, every video backed up to 2 drives. I wrote down times, weather, what she said. My buddies on the crew laughed at me. "You gonna sue over a trash can, Owen?" Maybe. Or maybe I just trusted the same instinct that's never let a foundation crack on me. Measure everything, assume nothing, and never pour until you're sure. Meanwhile, my father was getting worse. The Thursday crashes set the tone for his whole day. He'd pace. He'd ask where my mother was. One morning, he stood at the window in his robe, watching trash blow across the lawn, and said, "Owen, somebody's making a mess of our place." And I said, "I know, Dad. I'm taking care of it." His hands were shaking. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast, and I'd lost my appetite anyway. I drove out to a job that afternoon, a retaining wall for a couple building on a slope, and I poured it perfect. Plumb, level, every form tight. There's a peace in that kind of work that nothing else gives me. You take a mess of mud and rebar, and you make something that holds. And somewhere between the mixer and the trowel, it occurred to me that I'd been treating Brenda like a person I could reason with, when really she was just a load I needed to engineer around. You don't argue with gravity. You account for it. That was the morning I stopped being patient out of politeness. I got patient out of strategy. There's a difference, and Brenda was about to learn it. The fifth Thursday is when she brought a witness, and that's when I knew this woman wasn't just petty. She was reckless. She showed up with a man in a navy polo and a lanyard, clipboard tucked under his arm, the whole costume of authority. "This is Dale from Code Enforcement," she announced, loud enough for my neighbor Marlene to hear from her porch 2 doors down. "He's documenting the chronic violations at this address." I came down the driveway slow, hands in my pockets. "Morning, Dale. Which code enforcement are you with? City or county?" Dale opened his mouth. Brenda answered for him. "He works with the association. So, not code enforcement, not the city. Just a guy named Dale with a lanyard she probably bought at an office store. But Marlene was watching, and the Hendersons across the street, and Brenda loved an audience. She pointed at my bin, sitting upright and perfectly clean at the curb, and said, "See how it sticks out? Visible from the road. That's a violation, Dale. Mark it." "Brenda," I said, "the bin has to be visible from the road. That's how the garbage truck finds it." A couple of neighbors laughed. Quiet, but she heard it. And here's the mini twist I didn't expect. Getting laughed at didn't make her back down. It made her worse. Her face went pink, and she stepped forward and kicked my bin over right there, in front of Dale, in front of everyone, like a queen knocking a peasant's hat off. "There," she snapped. "Now it's in violation. Write it up." Dale shifted his weight. To his credit, the guy looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He scribbled something, but he wouldn't meet my eyes, and I clocked it. A man who won't look at you knows he's standing on the wrong side of a line. I'd find out later that Dale was Brenda's brother-in-law, and his only qualification for code enforcement was owning a clipboard and a navy polo. The lanyard was from a dentist's convention in Cincinnati. You can't make this up. I almost laughed myself because she'd just vandalized my property in front of a so-called witness and 3 real ones. A breeze came down the street and skated my junk mail across the lawn, and somewhere a wind chime, probably the very one she'd find somebody for, tinkled like it was applauding. But I kept my face flat. "You sure you want to do that with people watching?" "I am the people who matter here," she said. That line, I wrote it in my folder that night, word for word, because a woman who says that out loud is a woman who's forgotten that other people keep records too. There's a reason cops read you your rights before you talk. Words have weight. And Brenda handed out heavy ones like candy, never once imagining the day they'd be read back to her. After she left, Marlene crossed the street with her arms folded. She's maybe 70, sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who's buried 2 husbands and doesn't suffer fools. "She did the same thing to my wind chimes," she said quietly. $300. I just paid it. I didn't want the trouble." Then she looked at my upright bin, then at me. "You're not going to pay it, are you?" "No, ma'am," I said. "I don't think I am." She almost smiled. "Good." And she went back inside. That was the first crack in Brenda's kingdom, though neither of us knew it yet. While Brenda played sheriff, I went quiet. And quiet is when I do my best work. The 6th and 7th Thursdays, she escalated on paper. And I escalated in the county building, where the real power actually lives. The notices kept coming. $200, then a final demand, with a threat to place a lien on my home. A lien over a trash can. Curtis Vance had signed this one, board secretary, in handwriting that pressed hard enough to dent the page. The Vances were a match set. Most people at this point fold. The threat of a lien on your house is designed to scare you stupid, but I pour concrete for builders and banks. I read the fine print on contracts thicker than this whole HOA's rulebook. So, instead of panicking, I went looking for the rulebook itself. I drove to the Delaware County Recorder's office on my lunch break. Cool tile floors, the smell of old paper and printer toner. A clerk named Patty, who'd clearly heard 100 HOA horror stories before mine. I asked for two things: the recorded plat map for Sutton Ridge, and the association's filed covenants, the CC and Rs, the actual legal rules every homeowner agrees to. The takeaway here, and write this down: if you ever fight an HOA, the covenants are a recorded public document. Anyone can pull them. The board doesn't get to make up rules on the fly. They're bound by what's actually filed. I sat at a little table under a buzzing light and read all 40 pages. There was no rule about trash bin placement, not one word. Nothing about distance from the garage, nothing about visibility from the road. The standard Brenda kept citing didn't exist. She'd invented it. Then I unrolled the plat map and my pulse actually picked up. The property lines were clear as a poured slab. My lot ended at the sidewalk. The grassy strip where my bin sat, the strip where Brenda staged her little kicking show every week, was marked as public right-of-way. City of land, not Sutton Ridge land. The HOA had exactly as much authority over that strip as it had over the moon. She'd been writing me up, fining me, and threatening my home over a piece of ground her association didn't even control. I sat there a while, just looking at it. A printer hummed somewhere behind the counter. Outside, a county truck idled at the loading dock. I felt the way I feel when I finally find the soft spot under a slab that won't stop cracking. Not happy exactly, but clear. Now I knew where the failure was. And once you know where the failure is, the rest is just work. Then I pulled the city's solid waste ordinance because I wanted the full picture. There it was in plain municipal English. Residents shall place refuse containers at the curb on the morning of collection, with clear access for collection vehicles. Not by the garage, not hidden, at the curb. The takeaway is one most homeowners never learn: an HOA rule can be stricter than the city, but it can never override the city, and it sure can't punish you for obeying the law. Brenda's standard didn't just fail to exist, it directly contradicted the actual ordinance. I made copies of everything. Patty winked and didn't charge me for the extra pages. "Get her," she said, like she'd been waiting years for somebody to. But the real gut punch came when I asked one more question, almost as an afterthought. "Where do the fine payments go? Is there a public ledger?" Patty's eyebrows went up. "For a registered HOA, there's supposed to be. Annual financials filed with the state. You're a member. You can request them." I requested them. And driving home, with a folder full of copies on the passenger seat and the afternoon sun cutting through the windshield, I had the strange, calm feeling I get right before a big pour goes perfect. Every number lining up, every form holding tight. Brenda thought she was fining me into submission. She had no idea she'd just handed me the thread that would unravel her whole operation. The financials took 2 weeks to arrive, and when they did, I understood why Brenda Vance fought so hard to be queen of a trash can. I spread the documents across my kitchen table after Hazel went to bed. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and my father's TV murmuring down the hall. I'm not an accountant, but you don't pour million-dollar foundations without learning to read a budget. And this budget had a hole in it, shaped exactly like a person. Sutton Ridge collected fines, lots of them. Brenda had been writing up half the neighborhood for years. Trash bins, mailbox flags, garden gnomes, the wrong shade of beige. The violation revenue line showed thousands of dollars flowing in every year. But the matching line, the one showing where that money went, didn't add up. There was a vague entry: Compliance and Beautification, Premier Property Services, LLC. I'd never heard of Premier Property Services, so I pulled it up on the state business registry that night. It took about 90 seconds. The takeaway? And you can do this with any company in your state. Business filings are public, and they list the people behind the name. Premier Property Services, LLC had one registered agent, Curtis Vance, Brenda's husband. There it was. The fines Brenda squeezed out of her neighbors flowed into a company her own husband owned. No bids, no oversight, no real beautification anybody could point to. Just money walking out of the community's pocket and into the family's. The trash bin wasn't pettiness. It was inventory. Every fine she could manufacture was cash in Curtis's account. And the cruelest part clicked into place. She didn't kick my bin because she hated the bin. She kicked it to generate a violation. The mess was the merchandise. My father's bad mornings, my $50 notices, the lien threat on my house. That was just the cost of doing business for a woman who'd turned a neighborhood into a vending machine. I thought about Mr. Pruitt then, though I didn't know his number yet. I thought about every quiet retiree on this street who'd opened a notice, sighed, and written a check rather than fight City Hall. That's the engine of every scam like this. Not one big theft, but 1,000 small ones, each one too small to be worth the trouble of fighting. Brenda had built her whole machine on the math of exhaustion. She bet that no one would ever sit down at a kitchen table and add it all up. She bet wrong. Adding things up is literally my job. I sat back in my chair and let it settle, the way you let concrete cure. No anger, not really. Anger makes you sloppy. What I felt was certainty. For 9 weeks I'd been on defense, mopping up after her. Now I had the plat map that erased her authority, the covenants that exposed her invented rules, and the financials that turned her whole scheme into something a county prosecutor would find very interesting. The power had shifted. She just didn't know it yet, because I hadn't told her, and I wasn't going to. You don't warn a foundation before you test it. You load it quietly, and you let it fail on its own. I poured a glass of milk, checked on my dad, and started planning. Not revenge exactly, consequences. There's a difference, and Brenda had earned the second one. If you've ever wanted to watch someone get buried by their own paperwork, do me a favor and stick around, because this is where I stopped playing defense. Here's what most people get wrong about getting even. They want the explosion, the screaming match, the viral video, the big dumb confrontation. I wanted something better. I wanted it to be undeniable. So I built my case the same way I build a footing, from the bottom up, where nobody can see it until it's holding up the whole house. First, the hidden surprise, the thing she'd eventually trip over, literally. For weeks, Brenda had kicked my bin because it tipped so easily. Light plastic, empty by pickup, a satisfying little crash. So, one Saturday, while she was off at her cousin's lake house, I went to work on the curb with the tools of my trade. I dug out a section of the right-of-way strip, my right to maintain it, fully legal, and I formed and poured a hidden pad, reinforced concrete, rebar grid, cured to a footing that could hold a porch. Into it, I set a galvanized steel anchor and a low cradle, powder-coated flat gray, sized to lock the base of my bin in place. Then I patched the surface so it looked like ordinary asphalt repair, the kind you drive past 1,000 times and never notice. Total hidden weight. Pad and anchor together. A little over 90 pounds, fixed to the earth. It took most of a Saturday. The sun baked the back of my neck, the mixer growled, and the whole street smelled like wet cement, and the lilacs Marlene grows along her fence. Hazel brought me a glass of lemonade around noon and asked what I was building. A surprise, I told her. She thought that was hilarious. For who? For a lady who doesn't knock before she comes in, I said. She didn't get it, but she liked the lemonade stand vibe of the whole thing, so she set up a chair and supervised. Best foreman I ever had. That bin wasn't going anywhere. You could kick it like a mule, and the only thing moving would be your foot. I tested it myself before I went in, gave it everything I had, a full running boot like a frustrated woman in linen pants. The bin didn't even rock. My ankle, on the other hand, sang for an hour. Good, I thought. Now I knew exactly what Brenda was in for. The takeaway, builder to builder. Anchoring is just leverage in reverse. The same physics that lets a tiny bolt hold a skyscraper lets a buried pad turn a trash can into a brick wall. Brenda was about to learn structural engineering the hard way. Then I upgraded the cameras, 2 more, wired and weatherproof, with burned-in timestamps and a clear sightline to the curb, the sidewalk, and her face. Everything backed up to the cloud automatically. If she so much as breathed on that bin, I'd have it in 4K from 3 angles. But cameras and concrete only win the moment. To win the war, I needed people, so I started knocking on doors. Turns out I wasn't the only one bleeding money to Brenda Vance. Marlene, 2 doors down, had been fined $300 for a non-conforming wind chime. The Hendersons got hit for leaving their garage open during a yard sale. Old Mr. Pruitt on the corner, a Vietnam vet on a fixed income, had paid Brenda nearly $1,000 over 2 years for sins like an untidy flower bed. Every one of them had assumed they were alone. Every one of them had just paid, because fighting felt impossible. I showed them the plat map. I showed them the covenants with no trash rule, no wind chime rule, none of it. And I showed them Premier Property Services, LLC, Registered Agent Curtis Vance. I watched the same expression move across each face. Confusion, then recognition, then a slow, quiet anger that was a lot more useful than mine. Mr. Pruitt was the one who broke my heart. He's a Vietnam vet, lives alone on the corner with a flagpole he raises every morning at 7 sharp. He invited me in, and his place smelled like coffee and pipe smoke and old paper. And he had a shoebox, an actual shoebox, full of every HOA notice he'd ever gotten. He'd paid almost $1,000 over 2 years. I didn't want to be a bother, he said, and his voice cracked on the word bother, and I had to look at the wall for a second. A man stands in a jungle for his country at 19, and at 76 he's apologizing for being a bother to a woman who robbed him. That was the moment my patience turned into something harder. She's been stealing from us, Marlene said, when I showed her the LLC filing, standing in her doorway with a dish towel twisted in her hands. All of us. Looks that way, I said, and there's a meeting in 3 weeks, the annual HOA meeting, open to every member, minutes recorded. The takeaway that changed everything for them. An HOA annual meeting is a formal proceeding, and members have the right to demand financial records, raise motions, and even call for a vote to remove the board. The Vances had been counting on nobody knowing that. I made sure everybody did. I filed a formal written request for a full financial audit, certified mail, so there'd be a signature. I quietly called the county. I mentioned Premier Property Services to a clerk who got very, very interested. And one evening, a reporter from the Delaware Gazette, a woman who'd been working a story on HOA abuse for months, returned my call and asked if she could come to a certain meeting. I told her yes. I told her to bring a camera. I told her the most interesting part might happen out at the curb, on garbage day, if she wanted to be there for it. I also did one more thing, the most important thing, and it cost nothing. I wrote everything down in order, a clean timeline, dates, amounts, who said what, which document proved which lie. 9 weeks of chaos turned into one calm page anybody could follow. Because here's the truth about winning a fight like this. The person who can explain it simplest wins. Brenda had volume. I had a timeline. The takeaway, if you ever find yourself here, organize your evidence so a stranger could understand it in 2 minutes. Because at some point, a stranger with a badge or a gavel is exactly who you'll be handing it to. Then I waited. 3 weeks, letting it cure. Every Thursday in between, Brenda kept coming. And every Thursday my anchored bin stood there like a tombstone, with her name not yet carved on it. She'd kick it, stumble, glare at it like it had personally betrayed her, and stomp off rubbing her foot. The cameras caught all of it. I started to look forward to Thursdays. Of course, Brenda didn't go quietly into that good night. Cornered animals never do, and she could feel something changing even if she couldn't name it. The week before the meeting, she came at me with everything she had left. It started on Nextdoor. A long, breathless post about a problem homeowner on Larkspur Court who was harassing your volunteer board, letting his property fall into disrepair, and creating a hostile environment for families. She didn't use my name. She didn't have to. She tagged it with a photo of my bin tipped over. Trash everywhere. The mess she'd made herself. Now evidence of my disgrace. 40 neighbors saw it before noon. The old me would have fired back a furious comment. The new me screenshotted it, time-stamped it, and dropped it in the folder. Defamation needs a published false statement, and she'd just published a beauty with a photo I could prove she staged on camera. The takeaway? Never argue with a liar online. Let them write it down. A documented lie is a gift, wrapped and addressed to you. But the post did one thing she didn't plan. It put my name, well, my situation, in front of 40 neighbors at once, and a few of them, the ones who'd been quietly fined for years, started replying. Not to defend me. They didn't know me. They just started asking questions in the comments. Wait, what fund do the fines go to? Has anyone actually seen the budget? My mailbox fine was $200. Where does that money go? Brenda deleted the comments as fast as she could. But the internet has a long memory, and so do screenshots. She'd lit her own fuse and handed me the match. By the time she realized the thread was turning on her, I already had it saved in 3 places. When the smear didn't break me, she got physical. 2 days before the meeting, my cameras caught her in my driveway at dusk, crouched by my bin with a pry bar she'd brought from home. The footage is honestly something. She looks both ways like a cat burglar, then jams the bar under the lip and heaves. Nothing. She tries another angle. Nothing. She sets her feet, grips with both hands, and pulls until her sunglasses slide off her head into the grass. The bin doesn't move a quarter inch, because it's bolted to 90 pounds of buried Ohio bedrock by Whitaker. The crickets were going, the porch light buzzed, and this woman in her good blazer grunted and strained against a trash can that had quietly become the most over-engineered object in Delaware County. She kicked it one last time, said a word I won't repeat with my daughter in the house, scooped up her sunglasses, and stomped off into the dark. 3 cameras, every second of it, crisp and time-stamped. I sat on my couch and watched it twice. I almost felt bad. Almost. Then came the desperation move. The morning before the meeting, a tow truck pulled up to my curb. Brenda stood beside it in her linen blazer, pointing at my bin, ordering the driver to haul it away as abandoned property in the right-of-way. The driver, a young guy named Cody, hooked a strap to it and gunned his winch. I walked out with my coffee. "Morning, fellas." "This your can?" Cody asked. "It is. It's anchored to a footing I poured and permitted on a public right-of-way. I have every legal right to maintain. You pull on it, you're not towing a trash can. You're damaging city infrastructure and my property, on camera, under her orders." I nodded at Brenda. "She's not code enforcement. She's not the city. She's a private citizen telling you to destroy something that isn't hers. You want that liability, or you want to unhook it?" Cody looked at Brenda. He looked at the 3 cameras under my eaves. He unhooked the strap, said, "Have a good one," and drove off. Brenda's face was a thing to behold, pure sputtering disbelief that the world wasn't obeying her. "You think you're clever," she hissed. "Wait until the meeting. I'll have you removed from this community." "See you there, Brenda," I said. "Bring the financials." She didn't catch it. The way her own threat had just become mine. She still thought Thursday was her day. She had no idea I'd been counting down to it for 3 weeks. The annual meeting of the Sutton Ridge Homeowners Association was held in the community clubhouse, and I have never seen Brenda Vance look so comfortable right before losing everything. The room was packed, folding chairs, fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee from a 40-cup percolator in the corner. Brenda ran it like a coronation. Curtis sat beside her, shuffling papers. The reporter from the Gazette sat quietly in the back row with a notepad, and in a chair near the door sat a calm man in a sport coat I'd invited personally, a fraud investigator from the county prosecutor's office who'd grown very interested in premier property services. Brenda opened with her greatest hits: property values, standards, the sad state of certain homes. Then she pivoted, smiling at me like a cat. "Before new business, the board needs to address an ongoing violation and a homeowner whose behavior has become disruptive. I'm proposing a formal censure of Mr. Whitaker and a vote to... I want to set the scene, because I'll remember it the rest of my life. The clubhouse had those low ceilings that make every cough echo. Somebody's kid was peeling the label off a water bottle in the second row. The percolator wheezed. Brenda stood at the front in a cream blazer with a little gold pin shaped like a house, and she had this serene, untouchable look, the look of a woman who'd won this room 100 times and expected to win it again. Curtis sat to her left with a legal pad, already writing the minutes she'd dictate. The reporter's pen hovered. The investigator crossed his ankles and waited like a man who knows the fish is already on the hook. And here's the thing nobody in that room knew except me. I wasn't nervous. I'd been nervous for 9 weeks. That part was over. When you've checked your forms and you know the mix is right, you don't pray at the pour. You just pour. "Point of order," I said, standing up. She blinked. "You don't have the..." "I'm a member in good standing, and under the covenants you filed with the county, Article 9, Section 4, any member may demand review of association finances at the annual meeting." I held up the certified mail receipt. "I demanded it 3 weeks ago, in writing, so before we censure anybody, let's review the books, out loud, for everyone." The room went still. Marlene stood up. "I'd like to see them too." Then the Hendersons. Then Mr. Pruitt, slow on his cane. Then a dozen more. Brenda's smile cracked at the corner. "This is out of order." "It's the most in-order thing that's happened here in 9 years," I said. I turned to the room, my voice steady. "The way you talk when the forms are set and you know the pour is good. I'll make it simple. There's no rule in our covenants about trash bins. I read all 40 pages. The strip where she's been finding me is public right-of-way, not HOA land. The city's own ordinance requires bins at the curb. Every notice she wrote me was for breaking a rule that doesn't exist, on land she doesn't control. Murmurs rolled across the folding chairs. And the fines? I held up the financials. The fines from all of us, thousands of dollars, flow to a contractor called Premier Property Services. I pulled the state filing. The owner is Curtis Vance. I let that land. Her husband, the man taking the minutes right now. Curtis's pen stopped moving. Somebody gasped. Mr. Pruitt said, clear as a bell, I paid that woman $900. Brenda shot up, knocking her water bottle over. This is slander. He's a disgruntled... It's not slander if it's filed with the state, I said. And I have video of you personally kicking my trash over, then photographing the mess to fine me for it. 9 weeks of it. Want me to play it on the projector? Because the gentleman by the door would probably like to see it too. Every head turned to the calm man in the sport coat. He stood, unhurried, buttoned his jacket, and held up a badge. Delaware County Prosecutor's Office. Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance, we're going to need those financial records, all of them. Tonight, if they're handy. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Curtis went the color of wet drywall. He looked at Brenda the way a man looks at the person who talked him into the thing that's about to ruin him. And Brenda? Brenda finally turned to me, and for 1 second, the mask came all the way off. No authority left in her face. Just a cornered woman who'd run out of room. You did this, she said, almost a whisper. No, Brenda, I said. You did, every Thursday on my camera. I just kept the receipts. Then I reached over to the clubhouse TV they use for the welcome slideshow, and I plugged in my phone because I'd promised her I would. The room watched 9 weeks of footage in 90 seconds. Brenda kicking my bin, Brenda photographing the mess, Brenda with the pry bar, sunglasses falling, fighting a trash can in the dark. Somebody in the back actually laughed, then covered their mouth. Mr. Pruitt didn't laugh. He just watched, with his cane between his knees and his jaw set. A man finally getting to see the truth in daylight. For the first time in 9 years, Brenda Vance had nothing to say. Her mouth opened and closed, the percolator gurgled in the silence, and the reporter in the back row wrote it all down. It didn't end with handcuffs in the clubhouse. Real life is slower than that, and better. It ended with paperwork, which was always where Brenda was weakest. Within a month, the county confirmed what my kitchen table math had found. Over 4 years, the Vances had funneled more than $60,000 in HOA fines through Curtis's shell company. Brenda was charged with theft and tampering with records. Curtis took a deal. Both resigned from the board before the ink was dry, and a judge barred them from ever serving on one again. The white Tahoe went up for sale that fall. The neighbors elected a new board. Marlene became president. A woman who'd once been fined $300 for a wind chime now held the gavel, and the first thing she did was order a full, independent audit. Every wrongful fine got refunded. Mr. Pruitt got his $900 back and cried a little in his doorway when he told me, and I pretended not to notice because that's what you do for a man like that. He raised his flag the next morning, same as always, 7 sharp. But he stood a little straighter doing it. The local paper ran the reporter's story on a Sunday, front of the Metro section. HOA president charged after neighbors' hidden cameras expose fine scheme. There was a photo of my anchored bin, of all things, sitting innocent at the curb. My phone didn't stop for 2 days. Turns out half the county had a Brenda of their own, and they all wanted to know how a concrete guy with a folder took one down. I told every single one of them the same thing. You don't need to be a lawyer. You need to be organized, and you need to refuse to be tired. The records are public. The rules are public. The power was never as real as they wanted you to believe. But here's the part I'm proudest of. We didn't just claw the money back. We did something with the win. At the next meeting, a friendly one, with good coffee for once, I proposed we take the recovered penalty fund and turn it into something that couldn't be stolen, the Sutton Ridge Neighbor Fund. Money set aside to help residents on fixed incomes with repairs they couldn't afford, new gutters for Mr. Pruitt, a wheelchair ramp for the widow on Astor Lane, and a simple printed guide, 1 page, that I wrote myself. Know your property line, plat maps, right-of-way basics, your rights at a meeting, everything I'd learned the hard way, handed to every new family on move-in day, so nobody on this street ever feels as alone as I did at that window with my shaking father. We held a block party to launch it on a Saturday in September. Marlene strung lights between the lampposts. Mr. Pruitt manned the grill in an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," and dared anyone to comment. There were folding tables of casseroles, a cooler of root beer, Kids running through a sprinkler with that high screaming joy that only sounds like summer. The whole street smelled like charcoal and cut grass and somebody's vinegary potato salad. And for the first time since I'd moved in, nobody on Larkspur Court was afraid of anybody. Somebody asked me to say a few words. I'm not a speech guy. I just held up the one-page property line guide and said, 9 weeks ago, I felt completely alone on this street. The thing that changed it wasn't me being tough. It was all of us finally comparing notes. Then I sat down, because that was the whole truth, and there wasn't anything to add to it. My dad sat in his chair in the shade, calm, watching Hazel chase the Henderson kids across the grass. He didn't remember the trash, or Brenda, or any of it. The dementia had taken all of that, and honestly, I was glad it had. He just patted my arm with that thin, warm hand and said, "Nice neighborhood, son." His eyes were clear for a second, the way they sometimes still get. "You did good." And whether he meant the party or the block or his whole life, I took it. And it finally was a nice neighborhood. We'd made sure of it. My bin still sits at the curb every Thursday, anchored to 90 pounds of concrete nobody can see. I don't really need it anymore. Brenda's long gone, and the new board would never dream of touching it. But I left it there because some surprises are worth keeping, and because every now and then a new family moves in, gets a strange notice from somebody, and needs to hear there's a guy 3 doors down who knows exactly what to do. The concrete's still good. I poured it right the first time. Here's what I learned. Petty power only works when good people stay quiet and pay up. The second you start writing things down, the second you pull the public records that were yours all along, the bully isn't powerful anymore. She's just exposed. If you've got an HOA nightmare of your own, drop it in the comments. I read them, and somebody down there needs to hear they're not crazy and they're not alone. Hit subscribe if you want more stories where patience and paperwork beat people who confuse a clipboard for a crown. And next week, a developer tried to bulldoze a 90-year-old man's orchard for a parking lot and didn't check who really owned the water rights. You won't want to miss how that one ends.
What really took Brenda down? It wasn't the cameras, and it wasn't the Congress. That was still good. It was the paper. Owen beat her the moment he stopped reacting and started recording the moment he drove to a county office and pulled documents that were public the whole town. Her authority was a flop. The rules she decided didn't exist. The land she policed wasn't hers to police. And the money she squeezed from her neighbors left a trail any clerk could follow. Bullies like Brenda count on one thing, that you feel too small and too alone to check. Owen's real abundance wasn't strength. It was patience and the courage to do the boring work while she did the love one. He turned a scared old man's best mornings into a fun that helps the whole street. That's a lesson. Power that feeds on silent dies in their lives. Have you ever been pushed around by someone hiding behind a clipboard? Tell me your story in the comments. Subscribe if you believe preparation beats arrogance every time. And come back next week when a developer learns the hard way that you should always check who owns the water.